Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, Myth and Magic fans. This week I have a real treat for you on Myth and Magic because I'm interviewing a real-life paranormal investigator. Dr. Christy Sumner is the founding member of the Soul Sisters Paranormal organisation, and Christy and her sister and team investigate paranormal activity using scientific methods. If you are writing about close encounters, the spirit world, hauntings, ghosts or poltergeists, then you'll want to tune into my show next week to learn how the experts in the field handle themselves. This will be an exciting interview, but to get us into the mood, I wanted to start by examining something that has always puzzled me. How come ghosts are only found in haunted places? I can hear you laughing right now, but I think I'm right to ask this question because it goes hand in hand with sister questions, if you like, similar questions. For instance, what makes a place a haunted place? Why are some places more haunted than others? So here's the question, the primary question, why are ghosts only found in haunted places? Let's take a closer look. Part 1. The attraction. This week there's been news about recent archaeology at the ancient site of Hierapolis, which is in modern-day Turkey. By tracing the path of some hot springs through this ancient site, a team of modern archaeologists has discovered a sacred area and also the only known sanctuary of Pluto. They found Pluto's gate, also known as the Plutonian, i.e. the place of Pluto. It's an entrance to a cave that was once thought to be the entrance to hell. And there's even an engraved dedication to Pluto, the god, above the entrance that confirms this as the gate of hell. Believers of Pluto flocked to this place over a period of hundreds of years, probably 600 or 700 years. They flocked to this place to visit it. One of those visitors, a famous visitor, a Greek geographer named Strabo, he said, and I quote, "The gate is an opening of sufficient size to admit a man, and there the space is filled with cloudy and dark vapour, so dense that the bottom can scarcely be discerned. Animals which enter die instantly. Even balls, when brought in, fall down and are taken dead. We have ourselves thrown in sparrows which immediately fell down lifeless." So the priests are believed to have kept their own heads above the more toxic gas that was laying low, heavy. But they restrained their sacrificial animals down low, so the animals suffocated in carbon dioxide, which is what has been found there. The fact that the priests were able to escape unscathed from the tunnel and from the gates suggests to the believers perhaps that they had been given some kind of divine protection, perhaps by Pluto or most likely by Hades, the god of the underworld. The reason why I'm thinking about the Pluto gate in this context, you're asking yourself, is that the Turkish authorities, the tourist authorities, want to market the gate as a tourist attraction again. And why not? I guess that's exactly why the place was built in the first place in 200 BC, and it continued to be a popular tourist destination until at least 400 AD, because we have reports of people still going there then. People like to be scared. And we know, don't we, that because of the very many haunted attractions that we might visit, for example, the Haunted Mansion in Disneyland, which opened in 1969, and lots of other haunted attractions around the world, we know that people like to visit places to be scared. Hell houses, for example. They are haunted attractions run by Christian churches, and they especially run those around about Halloween time. Those kind of places were like fairground haunted houses, but they focused on the effect of sin and the effect of fate and on repentant sinners in an afterlife. And the Japanese have a tradition of what they call shiva houses, which were often very ornate haunted houses created in a garden somewhere and were meant to give the visitors chills in midsummer. In other words, there was a belief that a haunted house could refresh a visitor. Part 2. The hypnagogic. Next, we must consider lucid dreaming, also known as hypnagogia or hypnagogia. And this word describes the transitional phase between wakefulness and sleep. It's the threshold of consciousness that we all experience, and we all experience it every night. For most of us, the threshold is crossed without much fuss and without much rumpus, but for some people, and perhaps even for us at certain times in our lives, when we're at our most tense and our most nervous, this transitional state can lead to hallucinations and or lucid thinking. Among the most common views reported during the hypnagogic state, many say they see tunnels of light, and very often they report that they've seen random specks that could be interpreted as figures. Hypnagogic hallucinations also sometimes have an auditory component. Like images, hypnagogic sounds vary in intensity from very faint impressions to quite loud noises, with some even reporting bumps and knocks and crashes. If someone hears nonsensical sounds, they often report those sounds as voices. And perhaps the most common hypnagogic experience that we all relate to, I think, is the strange falling sensation followed by a jolt. And that jolt feels very real, and sometimes it causes something that's known as the night start. This kind of jolt after a falling sensation can wake a person up. It's happened to me, and it's happened to about 70% of the population. When people wake up with a jolt like this, startled, they sometimes find that their heartbeat is strong and they are out of breath. So it's a very real experience. All of those hypnagogic experiences are facilitated by fatigue or lack of sleep. So the second part of the mystery is that people tend to report terrifying phenomena, and phenomena they do not understand, in places where they go to sleep. So in other words, in houses, in the bedrooms of houses in particular, and in hospitals, in the wards of hospitals in particular, and in prisons, in the cells of prisons in particular. Do you get the idea? Part 3. The numinous. Numinous, which is spelt Numinous, means arousing spiritual or religious emotion, mysterious or awe-inspiring. And since the 17th century, we tend to use the word in connection with the idea that a deity or a spirit presides over a thing or a space. If you've never had a numinous experience, then it's rather sad, because I have had a number of them. And most of us have had at least one moment in our lives that, even if it wasn't exactly a numinous experience, was pretty close to one. For example, even if you're hostile to religion and you're sceptical about supernatural worship, I bet you keep quiet when you walk into church. Have you ever been inside a really big cathedral, a really big one, a cathedral that's full of visitors, and yet is so quiet that you can hear a person sniffing or a person dropping a penny from across the widest of the spaces? And that's because you're on the very edge of a numinous experience. Don't forget, numinous means arousing spiritual or religious emotion, mysterious or awe-inspiring. The same things happens in a cemetery. You might be a person who's sceptical about supernatural worship, but when you visit a cemetery during the day, even a beautiful bright day, there's something there, isn't there? Some emotional or spiritual force. It's just an intense feeling, really, but it's keeping you from stepping on the gravestones, isn't it? You don't sit down for a picnic, do you? You don't start playing ball, do you? No. because you're on the very edge of a numinous experience, because the feeling arouses in you spiritual and religious emotion or mysteriousness or inspiration. Tombs and churches have no rules. They're not like libraries and hospitals. There's no big sign up which says silence. In fact, churches can be very noisy places, especially when the organ and the choir are going full strength. So it's not the stillness and the tranquility that makes these places strange. Same can be said for the chapels of rest and rooms of remembrance. No, these places feel mysterious. They feel inspiring because there's a sense, perhaps, that a deity or a spirit presides over them, and that is called numinous. I once qualified as a mountain leader, and so after that I led groups to high places. In England, well, it was in Wales actually, our high places are probably lower than they are in your own country, but they're still pretty high, up where eagles live. We often used to stop on some lonely peak, and we assimilated what we felt, not so much what we saw in Britain, because in Britain it's virtually always foggy or cloudy, and certainly not what we heard, because on the top of a mountain it's perfectly silent. But there was an overwhelming feeling of awe mixed with reverence. The only way I could describe it was wordless joy of being at one with nature. And being in a high and lonely place is a numinous experience. Perhaps people like to enjoy intense mystical experiences, such as the sensation of this numinous. And this could explain why so many people visit sacred places. Where are you going on holiday? Oh, I'm going to such and such city. What will you do there? Well, I'm certainly going to visit some cathedrals. If you combine the sense of mystery and wonder with the rather prosaic fact that when people travel a long way to visit an attraction, they arrive with expectations, they want to be entertained, then the chances are they are looking to imagine that they experienced something, even if they didn't actually experience it. Do you see what I'm saying? They paid a lot, and it took a lot of time to get to this place to gain a mystical experience. They aspired to be surprised, and if they are not surprised, then they'll leave feeling dissatisfied, so they convince themselves that they've had a mystical experience. Part 4, the death. Death is the biggest mystery of all, and that's why people in 200 BC visited the tourist attraction called the Entrance to Hell, or Plutonian, which is how I started. In folklore, a ghost is the soul or spirit of a dead person. And across all religions and across all history, there's been an unshakable belief in the spirit world and in afterlife and in spiritualism. And if you've encountered that word before, you'll know that it's about, the idea is that there are spirits of the dead that exist in our dimension and possess perhaps the ability and the inclination to communicate with us, the living. If these are the kind of concepts that you buy into, and you've grown up believing, or you've been raised to believe in one of the great religions, then it will be difficult for you to separate what you've been taught, for example, about life after death, and what you know to be logically and rationally plausible. And anyway, even if you're the most doubtful rationalist in the world, there will be times in your life when you will feel scared, and you'll feel lonely, and you'll feel lost, and you'll feel overwhelmed. Those are the likely times that you're going to buy in to the idea of a haunting. Especially when you've suffered illness, or when you've suffered trauma, or when you've suffered bereavement. So all of us, no matter how tough we are on the outside, no matter how scientific our brain is, we will sometimes be forced to contemplate the idea of an afterlife and assess the value of our living days. And let's not forget, death isn't the opposite of life. It's an important and integral part of life. So that's the last part of the puzzle, the death. So back to the main question, why are ghosts only found in haunted places? Ghosts are more likely to be discovered in places where people go to entertain themselves because they expect scary things to happen, and reports of unexplained and mysterious phenomena have emanated from such places. For example, places like inns and homes and hotels and hospital wards and prison cells, because that's where people slept. And mysterious emotions, the numinous experiences, have been reported, and death is involved. Hospitals, prison death rows, cemeteries, catacombs, graveyards and mausoleums. So that's why ghosts are only found in haunted places. So anyway, I'll leave those thoughts with you, and don't forget to check in next week for the interview with the paranormal investigator, Dr. Christy Sumner. Get creative! Brighten the world with a crop of new words. Shakespeare did it, Jonathan Swift did it, Lewis Carroll did it, J.R.R. Tolkien did it. He invented the word tweens. So why shouldn't you? I want you to think about brightening the world by creating some new words. If producing your own words seems rather highbrow, and maybe you think it's the business of highfalutin sophisticates and bohemians with literature degrees, ask yourself this: where would the world be without muggles, without lightsabers, and without gruffalos? Are those words highbrow or sophisticated? I don't think so, but they were made up by authors. Furthermore, word manufacturing is fun, and it's an activity that gets you to focus your unerring genius on playfulness and on conception and on discovery. And that's a good thing, isn't it, for any creative artist, right? Plus, the product of your creative thinking will benefit the world, so everybody wins. Hooray! So I'm going to go through 3 ways to create a new word, but I'm going to start with the easiest way. The easiest way to create a new word, and it's the simplest and most energy efficient way, is to respell an old one. Respell an old one. In other words, you're going to look at a word which is second hand, and you're simply going to redesign it by putting the letters in a different order. And when you put the letters in a different order, it might require a new pronunciation. Now, if you think this is cheating or unsporting, try telling that to Tolkien, who decided, if you remember, to use the word dwarves with a V in his sagas instead of the existing and perfectly good English word dwarfs, which is with an F. He even admitted in a 1937 foreword to The Hobbit, "In English, the only correct plural of dwarf is dwarfs, and the adjective is dwarfish. In this story, dwarves and dwarvish are used, but only when speaking of the ancient people to whom Corin Oakenshield and his companions belonged." In other words, Tolkien consciously used a new spelling of an old word to provide his creations with some dignity. And so why can't you do the same thing? Did you know, for example, that a vampire was originally spelt vampire with a Y, V-A-M-P-Y-R-E? So I suppose that was the correct spelling. Dracula was not the first piece of literature to depict vampires, and it's probable that Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, was influenced by Preston Rhymes' Penny Dreadful titled Varney the Vampire, but they spelt their word vampire V-A-M-P-I-R-E, which, incidentally, that story introduced us to all of the standard vampire tropes. They didn't spell it vampire with a Y, they spelled it with an I. Why? Because they dared to be different, they wanted to be distinctive with their spelling. It's the same with lots of other words, like zombie. Zombie was originally, so therefore I suppose properly, spelt Z-O-M-B-I from the French. Or, if you want to be even more accurate, go to the Haitian zombie, Z-O-N-B-I, Z-O-N. But the first use of the word in English literature comes from a poet, who was the poet laureate, called Robert Southey, who lived 1774 to 1843, and even he spelt the word Z-O-M-B-I, no E on the end. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't spell a word the way that you did, because you can, and you will. Because here's your challenge. I want you to look at your most recent manuscript and identify an object, a device, or an event that is essential to your plot. The Holy Grail in the Arthurian legends, I suppose, is such an object. By the way, fun fact, the Holy Chalice, that we all know as the Grail, Grail, was originally spelled Graal, Graal. So, take the chosen item from your script and spell it differently. So, for example, to give you the idea, a magical ring might become a magical ring, W-R-Y-N-G-E. A lavish dinner might become a feast, F-E-A-S-T-E. A stronghold, a fortress stronghold up in the mountains might become a fortress, F-O-R-T-R-E-Z-Z. You get the idea. Play around, have some fun. The second easiest way to create a word is to go the portmanteau route. You don't have to study etymology to go down this route. The idea of a portmanteau was introduced to us by English author Lewis Carroll when Humpty Dumpty, of all people, explained to Alice that the meaning of some of the unusual words that she heard in the poem Jabberwocky isn't too hard to understand because it's two words joined together. And he gave an example. Slithy, he said, means slimy and lithe. The word portmanteau comes from a Victorian suitcase that used to open into two equal sections. Thus, your new word, if you choose to go down that route, and I heartily recommend that you do, ought to have two distinct and separate working parts. In case you think that portmanteaus are a bit artsy-crafty for you and your project, ask yourself where you'd be without scuzzy words such as brunch, snazzy, squiggle, and workaholic. All those words are portmanteaus, and someone must have come up with them in the first place. So here's your challenge. Skim over your most recent manuscript and identify a sensation or an emotion or an atmosphere or experience. It has to be something like that, a vague thing, and see if you can come up with a portmanteau word for that something. And you've all heard portmanteaus before, so you understand what I'm getting at. A holiday love affair is a vacation ship. Staying at home this summer is a staycation. Resting in front of the telly and doing nothing is chillaxing. I skimmed through my current script, and it's about a powerful woman who lives in a remote castle high up in the mountains, and I came up with a new portmanteau for where she lives. Bleakastle, B-L-E-A-K-A-S-T-L-E. So see what you can do. The final way to create a new word, final easy way, another easy peasy way, is to come up with a hybrid word and go down the hybrid route. And that's how we came up with zombie and grail and vampire, which we've already discussed, haven't we? Because those words, like most words in the English language, were originally used in another language, and we, the English speakers, acquired those words. We reconfigured them, and in some cases we refurbished them and then repurposed them. Hybrid words derive from at least two, and they must be, at least one of those must be foreign, languages. Often, but not always, the source words, and there must always be two source words, come from Latin and Greek. So liposuction is a good example. Lipos, I bet you didn't know this because it's the opposite to what you think. Lipos is the Greek for fat. And suctio is the Latin for sucking. So it just means fat sucking, liposuction. Anyway, don't let the Greek and don't let the Latin put you off. You don't need to be a Latin scholar to create your own hybrid words, because I'm going to explain how to do it and I'm going to give you a challenge. Here's your challenge. Glance across your most recent manuscript and identify a word that you have used that's uncommon and it's noteworthy and it's a bit unconventional. You must have one in mind, yeah? It probably sits there like a sore thumb. In my most recent manuscript, I was obliged to use a word that I'd never used before and I didn't really like, but it was the only word I could find that did the job that I wanted it to do. In my opinion, it's a clumsy portmanteau word and it's advertorial. And since you ask, I was writing about a magazine columnist in the 1970s and she was told to do some advertorials. Anyway, the word stuck out for me like a bandaged thumb. What hybrid word could I use that might be more elegant and less clunky? Well, this is where I turn to, and you will turn to as well for your challenge, the fantastic Google Translate. It's an amazing tool, and I hope you've used it before. But if you haven't, it's easy to find. It's at translate.google.com. And on this site, you can bung in any word and get the machine to translate it into Greek or into Latin. But even better than that, you can convert it into any other language. So advert, so advertorial is a portmanteau, obviously, of advert and editorial. So advert in Greek is prosecco. Advert in Latin is advert, so there's no point in converting that. Editorial in Greek is syntaxis. And I thought that Prosecco Taxis sounds like a fizzy drink that's been delivered by Uber, and not like an advert in a magazine that's pretended to be a feature. So it wasn't a very useful portmanteau. So I didn't go for that. But I was using the Google Translator again, and I searched editorial in some less familiar, to me anyway, languages. And I got an interesting result. In Czech, editorial is redakni. And I also looked at editorial in Punjabi, and that was sapadaki. If I combine the Czech word for advert, which is inzerat, with the Punjabi word for editorial, which is sapadaki, I can create a brand new word, which is insa sapadaki. Inza sapadaki, which according to me, the inventor of this word, means the same thing as advertorial, but somehow inza sapadaki has more zing and more sting to it, doesn't it? Inza sapadaki. So there's only one last thing to do, and that's check to make sure the new hybrid word that you've just created doesn't already exist. Because imagine how bad it would be if you later found out that it meant, perhaps in Filipino, for you know, a man's private parts. So I just typed into sapadaki, into Google, and guess what? It's a Google whack. That means there's no hits. That word has never been seen before, let alone used. So there you are, 3 ways to create new words. I want you to brighten the world with a crop of new words and get going right away, get creating and enjoy playing.